In the 50th minute of Canada's match against Qatar at the 2026 World Cup, a member of the Canadian coaching staff looked down at the field and immediately realized how serious the situation was. Hours later, head coach Jesse Marsch revealed a detail that sent chills through many people. He said the entire Canadian bench heard the sound of a bone breaking. Not the sound of a collision, but the sound of a bone breaking. What made it even more shocking was the timing. Canada were playing almost the perfect match. They were leading. They were completely controlling the game. They were moving closer to the knockout stage on home soil. Then, in just a few seconds, everything changed. Fans stopped talking about the score. They stopped talking about the result. All attention shifted to one player lying on the grass. And one question quickly began to spread. Has the 2026 World Cup just witnessed its first victim? Before Ismaël Koné's injury, everything was going perfectly for Canada. They led 3-0 at halftime. Jonathan David was making the difference once again. Qatar had already been reduced to 10 men after a red card. BC Place was erupting with energy. Fans were beginning to think about the knockout stage. And perhaps the most successful World Cup campaign in Canadian football history, everything was moving in the right direction. Canada controlled the match. Canada scored goals. Canada left Qatar with almost no way back into the game. Then one moment changed the entire conversation. Suddenly, nobody was talking about the score anymore. Nobody was discussing Jonathan David's performance. Nobody was debating Canada's chances of advancing. All attention shifted to Ismaël Koné, a player lying motionless on the pitch, a player preparing to be taken to the hospital, and a national team facing the reality that its biggest World Cup victory might have come with its highest price. That is why, the following morning, people remembered the injury more than the 6-0 scoreline. To understand why this injury has created so much concern in Canada, we first need to understand who Ismaël Koné is. Koné is only 23 years old. He is widely regarded as one of the brightest talents in Canadian football. After developing at CF Montreal, he quickly attracted attention with his ball control, movement, and creativity in midfield. His career soon took him to Europe, from Watford to Olympique de Marseille, then stayed Rennes FC, and more recently, US Sassuolo Calcio in Serie A. The journey, however, was not always smooth. There were periods of inconsistent form. There were moments when he struggled to fully establish himself, but last season changed everything. Koné began playing some of the best football of his career, and he found that form just as the 2026 World Cup was getting underway. Head coach Jesse Marsch placed enormous trust in him. Koné became a key piece of Canada's tactical system, not only because of his talent, but because of the energy he brought to the team. For Canada, this is not simply a midfielder. This is one of the players expected to lead the country's next football generation. And, in just a few minutes, all of those plans would face their biggest test yet. Canada were in complete control of the match. Qatar were already down to 10 men. Everything seemed to be moving toward a comfortable victory for the hosts. Then came the 50th minute. Ismaël Koné received the ball in midfield. He played a pass to a teammate. The play appeared to be over, but it was not. From behind, Ahmed Medivo charged in. The challenge came late. Koné had no chance to avoid it. No time to react. The collision happened directly in front of Canada's technical area. The reaction was immediate. Players raised their arms, calling for the medical staff. Teammates rushed toward the scene. The referee stopped the match. Even Ahmed Medivo put his hands on his head after the challenge. He understood what had just happened. As doctors reached Koné, the atmosphere inside the stadium changed completely. The celebrations disappeared. The excitement of a World Cup match was gone. Only concern remained. The medical team quickly stabilized Koné's left leg with a protective brace. Players stood nearby with anxious expressions. Some could not even bear to look. Later, head coach Jesse Marsch revealed that the entire Canadian bench heard the sound of a bone breaking. One detail that showed just how serious the injury was. A few minutes later, the decision was made. A straight red card. Qatar went from 10 players to 9. But by then, the red card was no longer the story. Because everyone understood that something far worse had just happened. As doctors continued treating Ismaël Koné, emotions began to boil over. The Canadian players were furious. They had just watched a teammate suffer a serious injury right in front of them. The atmosphere quickly became tense. Arguments broke out across the field. Players from both teams exchanged words. The tension even spread to the technical areas. For several minutes, the match barely felt like football anymore. All attention was focused on the area where Koné was receiving treatment. After reviewing the incident, the referee made his final decision. A straight red card for Ahmed Medivo. Qatar had already been reduced to 10 men during the first half. Now they were down to just 9 players. But the controversy did not end there. Some members of the Qatari side reacted angrily to the referee's decision. Meanwhile, Canada believed the red card was completely justified. From their perspective, there was nothing to debate. Koné's injury transformed what had been a one-sided match into one of the most controversial moments of the tournament so far. The score no longer mattered. The result no longer mattered. What mattered was the condition of one player. And what happened next would leave the entire stadium deeply emotional. After several minutes of treatment, Ismaël Koné was finally placed on a stretcher. The atmosphere inside BC Place became heavy with emotion. Tens of thousands of fans rose to their feet. Applause echoed throughout the stadium. It was not a celebration for a goal. It was a show of support for a player experiencing one of the most difficult moments of his career. Koné still found a way to respond. As he was carried off the field, he raised a thumbs up toward the crowd. A small gesture, but one that touched many people inside the stadium. Meanwhile, his family quickly made their way to the hospital. Head coach Jesse Marsch later confirmed that Koné would require surgery. His recovery timeline remained unknown. For Canada, it was the news nobody wanted to hear. They were still cruising toward victory. They were still moving closer to the knockout stage. But the joy had almost disappeared. Because everyone understood what this could mean. One of the most important players in the national team might have seen his World Cup come to an end on home soil. And then, 14 minutes later, something remarkable happened. Despite the emotional impact of Koné's injury, Canada still had a match to finish. Then came the 64th minute. Nathan Saliba scored from a beautifully taken free kick. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a moment to celebrate. But this time was different. Immediately after scoring, Saliba did not run toward the crowd. He did not head for the television cameras. He did not perform a personal celebration. Instead, he raised both hands and formed the number 8, the shirt number of Ismaël Koné. Then Saliba sprinted toward the technical area. He picked up the jersey of his injured teammate and held it high for the entire stadium to see. BC Place erupted instantly. Applause rolled through every section of the crowd. According to many people inside the stadium, the reaction was even louder than the celebration for the goal itself. This was no longer just a football moment. It was a moment of brotherhood. A message to a player lying in a hospital bed that he was not fighting alone. Nobody had planned it. Nobody had rehearsed it. It was simply the natural reaction of a team that had just watched one of its own go down. But even after the final whistle, the controversy surrounding the incident was far from over. After the match, the story took an unexpected turn. According to head coach Jesse Marsch, Ahmed Medivo personally went to Canada's locker room. His purpose was simple: to apologize to Ismaël Koné. The revelation quickly drew attention, because it suggested that Medivo understood the seriousness of what had happened. Marsch also admitted that he did not believe the challenge was intentionally meant to cause an injury. But the real issue, in his view, was the reaction from the rest of the Qatari side. While Medivo accepted responsibility and offered an apology, several members of the Qatar bench continued to protest the red card decision. That was the part Marsch found most difficult to understand. A player had suffered a broken leg. A player had been rushed to the hospital. And from Canada's perspective, The red card was an obvious decision. The contrast between those reactions fueled much of the post-match debate. On one side was remorse. On the other was protest. Two completely different interpretations of the same incident. Perhaps that is why the confrontation between the two teams did not truly end when the final whistle blew. But for Canada, the most important issue is no longer the controversy. It is what comes next. Because the team must now prepare for the rest of the tournament without one of its most important players. And that challenge could ultimately prove far more significant than any argument about the red card. Looking at the scoreboard, this was a perfect night for Canada. A 6-0 victory. Jonathan David scored a hat-trick. A place in the knockout stage was suddenly within reach, but behind that result was a very heavy price. Ismaël Koné was not just another player in the squad. He was one of the most important midfielders in Jesse Marsch's system, a player who brought creativity, energy, and balance to the team. In the months leading up to the World Cup, Koné had become a key part of Canada's plans. Now, everything has changed. Early reports indicate that he suffered fractures to both the tibia and fibula, a serious injury that requires surgery. And that almost certainly means his 2026 World Cup journey is over. That is the cruel reality of football. One moment, you are competing in the biggest tournament on the planet. A few seconds later, the dream you spent years chasing can disappear. Canada still have a chance to make a deep run in this tournament. The talent is still there. The momentum is still there. But from this point forward, they must continue without one of their most important players. And that may prove to be the greatest challenge this team faces at the 2026 World Cup. If you've enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments whether Canada can still make a deep run without Ismaël Koné. And don't forget to subscribe for more World Cup coverage and analysis. Years from now, many people may forget the score of this match. They may forget that Canada won 6-0. They may even forget that Jonathan David scored a hat-trick. But it will be much harder to forget what happened to Ismaël Koné. People will remember the moment an entire stadium rose to its feet and applauded. They will remember the number 8 jersey held high by Nathan Saliba in the middle of the pitch. And they will remember a team that somehow found the strength to keep playing after watching a teammate leave the stadium on his way to the hospital. That is what makes the World Cup different. It is not only about goals. It is not only about trophies. It is also about the human stories that unfold behind every match. Stories of triumph. Stories of heartbreak. Stories of resilience when everything suddenly changes. Canada will continue its journey. They will keep chasing their World Cup dream. But this tournament will never be exactly the same for them again. Because no matter how far they go, the image of Ismaël Koné leaving the field on a stretcher will remain one of the defining memories of their campaign. And perhaps that is the lasting legacy of this World Cup night. Not the result, not the statistics, but the reminder that behind every great tournament are real people, real sacrifices, and moments that no one will ever forget.